Welcome to the College Investor Audio Show, where we talk about the biggest issues impacting millennial money, from student loan debt to side hustles to building wealth. We will show you how to get out of debt so that you can build real wealth for the future.
Welcome to the College Investor Audio Show. So glad you're here today. Such an important and very interesting topic to discuss today. We did a survey and asked, how many Americans support student loan forgiveness? We'll share you the results today and share with you some of our thoughts too. So, I'm sure you've heard over the past few months, the idea of blanket student loan forgiveness has been pushed by Senators Elizabeth Warren and, of course, Bernie Sanders. Now, that's a terrible Bernie Sanders impression, I'm sorry. Now, President-elect Biden has even supported up to $10,000 in student loan forgiveness. It's also safe to say that Biden has the most conservative plan for fixing the student loan debt crisis, with other Democrats wanting to see $50,000 in student loan forgiveness or even total elimination of student loan debt altogether. However, these proposals aren't without controversy, of course. While 45 million Americans have student loans, not all of them are struggling to pay them, and many of these borrowers are in the top 10 to 15% of income earners in the country. Furthermore, that's only about 30% of Americans. So many people will say, what about us? It's a fair question, and we wanted to know what they thought. So our survey of 2,000 Americans included three cohorts: those with student loan debt, those who've had student loan debt, either paid off, forgiven, or eliminated by other means, and those who've never had student loans. Here's what we discovered. Here's some of the key findings. We looked at how Americans feel about various proposals of student loan cancellation and examined it overall and by cohort. Here's what we found. Overall, 73% of Americans surveyed were in support of forgiving $10,000 in student loan debt. Even 53% of individuals who never had student loans still supported this. Overall, 63% of Americans surveyed were in support of the larger $50,000 student loan forgiveness proposal. This proposal still had a slim majority of 51% of individuals who've never had student loans that do support it. 60% of Americans surveyed were in support of total elimination of student loan debt. Wow. So for those who never had student loans, only 44% supported that proposal. We also wanted to see how people felt about the fairness of this type of program. We looked at two metrics. 52% of those surveyed believed there should be an equal tax break or program of the same value for those who don't have student loans. Only 37% of those surveyed felt there should be an income limit on student loan forgiveness. The majority were kind of indifferent to income limits or believed that loan forgiveness must be extended to all who have loans. All right, now, here's what the student loan debt crisis looks like. With those findings in mind, it's important to take a look at what the student loan debt crisis actually looks like. So right now, there is 1.6 trillion with a T in outstanding student loan debt. This is owed by 45 million Americans. It's also important to note that there is also another $132 billion in private student loans. The proposals above will only impact federal student loans, so even if anything is canceled, this amount will likely remain, from the private sector at least. So with that in mind, here's what the individual borrower will owe. Average student loan debt is just a tick above $32,000. Median student loan debt is $17,000. Average student loan payment, $393. Woo! Median student loan payment, $222. And if you're interested in digging deeper into the numbers, we have tons of stats you can find at thecollegeinvestor.com. And when it came to how they were working towards eliminating their debt, 61% of those with debt in our survey were paying them off. 22% said they were currently working towards a student loan forgiveness program. 10% said they were receiving some type of employer repayment assistance to help them eliminate their loans. The remaining 7% were struggling through default, forbearance, and other situations. All right, so as of today, 50% of student loan borrowers likely qualify for some type of student loan forgiveness program. This could be popular programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, PSLF, or maybe more vague ones like state-based repayment assistance programs. However, even though these programs exist today, most borrowers don't know they exist. Sadly, only 34% of those surveyed knew about how many loan forgiveness options there were. PSLF was the most well-known loan forgiveness program, but man, not even a majority knew that existed, which is why we talk about it a lot if you kind of scroll through this podcast. Now here's what the critics say. With these numbers in mind, critics of student loan forgiveness will argue the following. First, only about 30% of Americans even owe student loan debt. Second, college graduates on average earn much more than non-college graduates, to the tune of about $1 million more over their lifetime, I should say. That's about $32,000 more per year. Third, college graduates have a 3.5 times lower poverty rate than those who haven't gone to college. And along these same lines, college graduates are 47% more likely to have health insurance and 73% more likely to have an employer who helps pay for those health benefits. Now, with all of that in mind, any loan cancellation initiatives would clearly benefit a minority of Americans who, on average, do better than most. Finally, what would you say to the high school student today, looking at paying for college next year? Did this young adult miss the boat on loan forgiveness? That's not to say there are exceptions. It's an average after all, and not all who have student loans have graduated college as well. But when crafting large-scale policy initiatives, it's important to keep these figures in mind. Now, President-elect Biden has proposed canceling up to $10,000 in federal student loans for borrowers who meet certain criteria. Overall, we found that 73% of Americans surveyed were in support of Biden's plan to forgive $10,000 in student loan debt. Only 12% of respondents were actually against it. Of course, 83% of those who currently have student loan debt support the plan to forgive $10,000 in loans. For those that had student loans but have already paid them off, 67% still supported forgiving $10,000 in student loan debt. Finally, when asking those who never had a student loan whether they would support the proposal to cancel $10,000 in student loans, 57% were still in support of it, 20% were against, and 23% were just kind of neutral on the idea. $50,000 in student loan forgiveness. Now let's jump to that one. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Elizabeth Warren have been pushing a plan to cancel $50,000 in student loan debt. Overall, we found that 68% of Americans surveyed were in support of a plan to forgive $50,000 in student loan debt. Only 15% of respondents were against it. This plan saw a roughly 5% decrease in favorability across all cohorts. 77% of those who currently have student loan debt support the plan to forgive $50,000 in student loans. For those that had student loans but have already paid them off, 62% still supported it. And finally, when asking those who never had a student loan whether they would support the proposal to cancel $50,000 in student loans, 51%, still a majority, in support, 24% against, 25% neutral. Total elimination. Let's get to that one. Now, there hasn't been a serious proposal made to eliminate all student loan debt. There has been talk of it. Overall, we found that 60% of Americans surveyed were actually in support of a plan to forgive all student loan debt. 23% were against it, 17% neutral. Now, what's interesting here is that support is lower, in some cases significantly, and the amount of people against has grown sizably. 70% of those who currently have student loan debt support the plan to forgive everything. For those that had loans but have already paid them off, only 50% supported that, and in the group, 30% were against it. And then those who never had a student loan before, whether they would support the proposal to cancel everything, 44% in support, 31% against, and 25% neutral. Fairness and limits. Of course, one of the big arguments against a blanket loan forgiveness program is that it's rewarding a minority of people who will likely be in the upper half of earners in the United States anyway. With that said, we wanted to see how Americans felt about some type of mutual benefit to those who may not have had student loan debt. For example, Andrew Yang mentioned a tax credit for those who don't have loans forgiven, so they would still get the same amount of benefit or money in the end. 52% of Americans surveyed were in support of this type of tax credit or break. Only 16% were against it. And along those same lines of fairness, we were kind of curious about how Americans viewed income limits on these types of programs. Like, for example, Biden has proposed capping those who are eligible for loan forgiveness at only making $125,000 per year. I think many Americans find these arbitrary numbers hard to swallow and would like something all or nothing, basically. For example, a doctor who just graduated but is in training, a resident, would likely be earning about $55,000 a year and could see upwards of $150,000 in student loan debt forgiven. Meanwhile, someone who's been struggling with debt for a decade but suddenly had a good income year and is finally making progress would see nothing. In fact, only 37% of Americans felt there should be a mandatory income limit. With all of that in mind, let's take a look at some final thoughts. It was just really interesting to see such wide-ranging support for student loan forgiveness, especially from those who've paid off their loans or who never had student loans to begin with. It was also clear that there is much more support for a small amount of forgiveness versus larger amounts or even total forgiveness. Here's my biggest concern with any blanket loan forgiveness program. It won't solve the root of the problem. It's just a Band-Aid. In fact, if we only cancel $10,000 in loans without any other reforms, it's likely we will be back in the same place in just 3 to 5 years. Student loan reform and potential forgiveness needs to be combined with addressing the rising cost of college. For example, we could broaden a program like public service loan forgiveness to include every borrower, all loan types, all jobs, all payment plans. Simply make 10 years of payments while working, and the balance is forgiven. But what if the government, instead of just paying that balance, charged that balance back to the college or university where the loan was from? Now colleges would be extremely incentivized to both reduce costs and also improve graduate employment, since any debt left over would come out of their pocket. Regardless, there does seem to be strong support to do something to address the student loan crisis. Now let's talk about the methodology of the survey. The College Investor commissioned Pollfish to conduct an online survey of 2,000 Americans. The survey was fielded December 10th and 11th of 2020. And that's all we have for you today. I hope you found that really interesting and informational. And if you want to know more about the stats of student loans and student loan forgiveness and really kind of keeping up to date of the news and what's going on, you can see everything at thecollegeinvestor.com. Just type in these words, Biden student loan forgiveness, and you'll find this article and the survey. Thanks so much again for stopping by, and we'll talk to you again very soon.